Okay, hello everybody. So you are watching this video because you would prefer to get the more thorough explanation of the essay, basic essay diagram, and the other information contained in your homework. If you're not interested in the full-blown, lengthier, more thorough version, then stop watching the video, just open up the PowerPoint and you can get your notes from that. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want you to do is to fill out your diagram on what an essay is supposed to look like. So if you looked at an essay from a distance, and just kind of took it in chunks, this is, what it should look like. This is how it should go. So an introduction paragraph is where we start, and it's got this funnel shape to it, as you can see. And obviously the idea behind an introduction is to catch the reader's attention with some interesting information related to your topic at the beginning, and to sort of gradually lead the reader towards your thesis statement, which is going to be your central argument about the topic. So to start, the top part of the funnel is wide because you want your opening statement to about your topic to be sort of broad and general enough that anybody would read it and they would agree with it. There's nothing super controversial here. It's intended just to sort of be enticing for the reader and to make them want to read on without being too controversial. Okay. Now, opening statement about your topic, it says use a recommended intro strategy if possible. That's going to be covered on a later slide. So once you figure out how you're going to start with one of these strategies, you then would give some general details about your topic, and eventually you've got to lead to your thesis statement. The thesis statement is going to establish your central argument on the topic. Now, next week we're going to get into the difference between college level thesis statements and high school level thesis statements. So we're going to be working on this a lot, but typically the end of your introduction is where you establish your thesis. One big mistake that a lot of high school level writers make is they start their essay with the thesis statement and then kind of go over their main points and stuff, and then they get to the end and they just kind of repeat the thesis. That's really not really what you want to do. You want to start with something interesting and intriguing, creative if you can, and then lead me into it and have it here. All right, so that is your introduction. Then we're going to get to our body paragraphs. Now, for your body paragraphs, each one of these you want to follow what's called the extended body paragraph structure, which will be covered in a later slide. But your body is going to be, typically it's broken down into 3 main points. Sometimes you can get away with only having 2 body paragraphs. Sometimes you have to have more. Sometimes you need 5 or 6 before your argument is completely developed. But typically, expectation is we're going to have at least 3 or about 3. So body paragraphs follow a set structure. You're going to start with your main point, which is called your topic sentence. So you got main point number 1. You have the extended body paragraph structure, which again, we'll go over later. You want to make sure that you include at least 1 mid-paragraph transition. So I'll give you an example of that later on. And then finally, you're going to end it with a concluding sentence, which wraps up this main point, touches on some of your ideas that you elaborated on in the middle, and then if possible, sets up the next main point. Notice that transitions in this box, you've got transitions used at the beginning here and throughout. You've got transitions used at the beginning of this paragraph and throughout, transitions used here also, not only at the beginning, but also throughout the paragraph. So you just basically follow this structure over and over again with a different main point, making sure that each body paragraph develops its own unique main point until you've thoroughly argued your thesis statement. All right, so there you go. And then we get to our conclusion. So the conclusion is basically an inverted version of the introduction. All right, it's got the restated thesis statement at the beginning, so it starts narrow and then it's going to gradually branch off towards more broad and generalized ideas. So you restate your thesis statement here, you would have another transition. That's why you've got that another arrow coming in here. You're going to have another transition indicating that you're concluding the essay. Restate that thesis. Obviously you want to summarize the body paragraph main ideas. You want to end with some final thoughts, and this is key. You want to try to mirror your introduction strategy if possible. We'll get into more concrete versions of that and examples of that next week. But you try to make your final couple of sentences, your final sentence or your final couple of sentences should incorporate some of the language you used in your introduction method. And this is what we call bringing the essay full circle. If you can mirror your introduction strategy at the end, it puts a nice layer of polish on the essay and shows that you thought through how you were going to form your argument from beginning to end. Okay, so that basically does it for the diagram. Now we're going to flip the sheet over and we're going to look at methods of introduction. But before we get there, we've just gone over two really important things. And to be honest, this PowerPoint is going to concentrate on two very important things. When we talk about college level essays, to excel as a college level writer, one must score well in the following areas. You have to score well under content and ideas. And what that means is that all the paragraphs are fully developed. That includes the introduction and the conclusion paragraphs. You want to have them fully developed. And all of the main ideas and main points are adequately explained with appropriate details and examples. And we'll see the extended paragraph guidelines in a little bit. But fully developed paragraphs at the college level tend to be around 7, maybe 8, sometimes even longer sentences. And we talk about having a mid-paragraph transition, so we know we're going to have at least, when we have our main point, we're going to have at least 2 examples of supporting evidence that are thoroughly explained. So there's a lot going on there. You have to make sure that every paragraph is long enough so that it's fully developed and everything's adequately explained. The other area that you have to score well in is form and organization, and that is covered on the previous diagram. All right. You want to aim for a powerful introduction, something creative, something strong, something bold. You want to have a clear thesis statement written at the college level. So again, next week we'll get into college level thesis statements, and you want to incorporate that as much as you can. For your body paragraphs, you want to make sure that they are following that extended body paragraph structure. And then again, the icing on the cake is having a conclusion that matches the introduction in wording, style, and power. You don't want to start with a really creative and an amazing introduction and then just kind of fizzle out with a cliche conclusion. You want to make sure that the conclusion paragraph goes back to that introduction, that powerful introduction, and mirrors that and mimics it. Now again, don't look at this as merely a 5-paragraph essay. Yes, that is kind of the standard, but that's not always required. There have been many high-scoring essays, I'm talking like 8s and 9s, that are sometimes only 3, sometimes only 4 paragraphs. But that's difficult to do. You have to be a pretty advanced level writer in order to have a high-scoring 4-paragraph or 3-paragraph essay. Most people are more comfortable working with the 5-paragraph structure. It ensures that you are putting forth a well thought out and well reasoned argument. So, this is kind of your fallback, but you can expand or in some cases shorten it. So now let's go to the back side and let's look at those methods of introduction. So the first one is a generalization. So just write down generalization. You don't necessarily have to write down all of this other stuff. You can paraphrase it, you can shorten it. But a generalization is pretty much what you've been taught to do since middle school. It's an opening sentence that states something about an essay subject in very broad and generalized terms. So, you've probably heard the cliche opening sentence where, the essay starts, people all over the globe battle with issues of leadership, or throughout history, many cultures have struggled with issues of leadership. Those are both examples of what we would call generalizations. It's just very broad, generalized terms that introduce, the idea of, okay, this essay is going to be about leadership styles. It sometimes works for a generalization, but typically this is considered more middle school or high school level writing, all right? But that is not to say you can't start with a generalization effectively as a college level writer. Now you can also do what's called an original definition, all right? Notice the key word here is original, all right? Providing your own definition of a topic that will be explored throughout the essay. So if you take a concept like leadership and you define it in your own terms, leadership means putting forth blah, 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 and you sort of expand from there. Not the dictionary definition, all right? That you want to avoid. That's one of the things we're going to identify as something not to do later. But just taking your topic and providing an insightful definition, kind of providing your own definition of it. You can use imagery, leadership looks like, and then you, again, maybe provide some examples of imagery to define it. But there's that. Then we have what are called anecdotes, all right? An anecdote is a brief story that illustrates the main idea. Anecdotes can be made up by you, or they can be drawn from real life experience. So you could, it is totally appropriate in an introduction to start with a personal anecdote. So if you had something related to leadership styles, maybe you have a parent, one parent who is very authoritative and another parent who's very collaborative, and you could talk about a time where you were in trouble, or you could write about a time where your parents tried to manipulate you into doing something, and one used that collaborative approach and then one used that authoritative approach. Telling that story would be an effective way to start that essay. Or drawn from real life experience, you could explain an anecdote related to, maybe a coach, maybe a famous coach who's known for either authoritative or collaborative leadership. You could have an anecdote from the news if you, heard about somebody in the news that, somehow pertains to the topic. Anecdotes can be very effective, okay? And then there's making an analogy or a comparison. So you take the main idea and you compare it to something else, pointing out the common elements. So authoritative leadership is kind of like, and then you provide, a comparison. Or being a collaborative leader is similar to, and then again providing an example of what you could compare that to. Now, if you're going to make that analogy or a comparison, you want to make sure you elaborate on that. You want to make sure you have a follow-up sentence or two explaining that and making it concrete. All right. Next, we have quotations. So starting with a famous quote or starting with a quotation. We got to be cautious here, all right? If you find one that relates to your subject and you want to start with it, make sure you identify who said it. Don't just start an essay with a quote without attributing it to the person who actually said it. And I want to encourage you to not necessarily rely on like brainy quotes, and those kind of websites, but to try to, it would be a poor thing to do to start an essay with a quote and then, cite it as, so-and-so from Brainy Quotes, because Brainy Quotes is kind of like Wikipedia. It's not necessarily a reputable source. So you want to try to find a more credible source for your quotations. You don't want to quote the dictionary. Again, we never provide dictionary definitions. But you can get a quote from famous individuals, or you can even do anonymous nobodies. You could do, my grandfather always used to say, quote, blah, 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 blah. And even that would be kind of an effective way of using a quotation to start an essay. So there you go. And again, if you're going to use a quote from like a family member, here is an example where it's okay to use some of those personal pronouns. It's okay to say, my grandfather used to always say to me, quote, blah, 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 and because normally we say, don't use those personal pronouns, don't say I or me or my in an essay. But this is an exception to that rule. If you're using a quote, just like on the previous one, if you're doing an anecdote and you're telling a personal story, something you experienced, something you witnessed, then it's okay to use I, me, and my, and just in the introduction. Same thing with quotations. If you're not going to use a quotation from a famous person or an important person, if you're going to use a quotation from a family member, again, you can get away with that. All right, let's finish this up. Surprising statements, facts, and statistics. So it's pretty straightforward. You do a little extra research, and you start the essay with a startling fact or some kind of startling statistic that is related to your main idea. It doesn't necessarily have to have a number attached to it. It doesn't necessarily have to be data or a statistic. It can just be some kind of startling observation that you've personally made that you can use to sort of start your essay off with a bang. But being surprising, being creative with either observations or facts or statistics, a very effective way of starting with starting your essay with a bang. And then we've got irony and humor, my own personal favorite of them all. Excuse me. When you open your essay with a humorous tone or stating the opposite of what you really mean, sometimes that can be an effective means of doing an introduction, but you just need to make sure it's appropriate, right? So with an essay like Leadership Styles, and you're going to be talking about a dark novel like Lord of the Flies, Ralph versus Jack. Okay, maybe starting with irony or humor wouldn't be the most appropriate for that essay, but that is not to say that you're going to have other essay topics which would allow you to explore the ironic or humorous side of a topic. So that is also an effective way of doing it. It typically requires a more advanced writer to pull off irony or humor in order to do it well. And then finally, there's a rhetorical question. It is totally fine to start an essay with a question or a series of questions, but you just have to be careful with them. You don't want to overuse it too often, all right? And if you open an essay with a question, you want to make sure it doesn't have an obvious answer, all right? And also make sure that you explore the answer to the question throughout the essay. You want to make sure you provide an answer or at least provide an exploration of the answer. But don't have just like a simple yes or no question starting your essay. All right, you want to come up with something that gets the reader thinking, truly gets the reader thinking. So rhetorical questions, again, they can be effective. All right, that wraps up the methods of introduction. Let's talk about things we want to make sure we avoid now. All right, don't apologize for your argument. So what we mean is, don't say, well, in my opinion, I think that blah, 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 blah. Again, you want to be forceful in your introduction. And when you say, in my opinion, it's kind of like you're getting defensive right off the bat, or it's like you're apologizing, you're sort of excusing, oh, well, listen, this is just my opinion, but, blah, 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 blah. Or any language like this. I may not be an expert, but I feel blah, 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 going on from there. So those are things we try to avoid. Again, we've already covered no dictionary definitions. Do not do, Webster's dictionary defines leadership as, that's, again, it's cliche, it's boring, it's not going to make your essay stand out very well. And then don't announce the purpose of your paper. Never refer to your essay in your essay. Don't say, in this essay, I will argue how blah, 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 blah. You skip all of this kind of language and you just argue your thesis. You just argue your central claim, okay? Now we're going to shift to the extended paragraph structure handout. That's the other handout that I provided you. When we get to the body paragraphs, we want to lengthen our body paragraphs. We want to elaborate more on our main points, and we want to make sure that we're providing multiple examples of details and evidence to support our main ideas. So the extended paragraph structure handout outlines what we call standalone paragraph responses. So if somebody says, just write a paragraph about blah, 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 you want to make sure, if you're practicing college level standards, that you're using that extended paragraph style. But this should also basically be the format of your body paragraphs. Sorry, I needed some water there. So as you can see, an extended body paragraph is about 7 or 8 sentences, depending on how far you go with it, all right? Sentence number 1 is where you're going to state your paragraph topic, your topic sentence, or your main point. All right, there's going to be an example for you on the next slide, and you'll see the topic sentence in red. Sentence number 2 is where you're going to provide your first detail about your paragraph topic. So you're going to establish the topic and then provide your first detail, your first detail that supports it. And then you're going to start elaborating. Here's where you're going to start taking that first detail and you're going to provide specific support or an example, or you're going to elaborate what you mean by this first detail. And then you're going to take that even further. You can provide a second specific support statement example or elaboration. It could also be a continuation of this. So you could provide your main point, have your first detail, and then provide a support statement, and then down here have your example or elaboration. These two can kind of go hand in hand. And then when you get to your 5th sentence, here's where you want to have a mid-paragraph transition. Again, that is going to be in yellow, so look for it on the next slide. And then you're going to have a second detail about your paragraph topic. Remember to use a transition word to move from the first one to the second. So it could be as simple as saying, additionally, comma, and then going on. Same structure though, you're gonna support that second detail with a supporting statement, example, or elaboration, and then you're gonna take it a step further with another sentence, which can be a continuation of this one. And then finally, you're gonna close your paragraph by restating your paragraph topic and your two details in one fluent statement. So you're looking at, okay, here's my main point, here's my first detail, here's my second detail. How can I put that all together in one sentence to move myself forward to the next paragraph? All right, so let's look at an example of what this looks like. So your handout, excuse me, I'm gonna take some more water here. Your handout uses the topic of fruit. Excuse me, my goodness. And this is just an example what a standalone paragraph would look like. This could also be a body paragraph if you were to have to write an essay about fruit. This is written at more of a basic level, but it's done intentionally just to kind of give you a clear idea of the structure of a body paragraph and what it looks like. So we're going to start with our topic sentence. One would be hard-pressed to find anyone who hasn't heard that fruit is the perfect snack for children and adults alike. Now I have to get to my first detail. People often choose fruit versus other sugary snacks to eat because it provides various vitamins that the human body needs. Well, there you go. Here's my first detail supporting this. Now I'm going to elaborate on that. I'm going to give some examples. An important vitamin found in many fruits, such as berries and citrus fruits, is vitamin C, which is instrumental in fighting off illness. All right, and now I'm going to add to that, in addition to vitamins that keep humans physically healthy, some fruits like bananas also provide nutritional sustenance for emotional well-being because they are packed with various stress-fighting vitamins and minerals. Here's my mid-paragraph transition. Another reason that fruit makes the perfect snack, so again, my topic sentence is about fruit being the perfect snack, so I'm tying it together. In my mid-paragraph transition, another reason that fruit makes the perfect snack is the fact that there is little preparation needed to eat it. So here's my second detail supporting it. Now I'm going to elaborate. Most fruits can be eaten raw without any utensils. And elaborate even further, this means that they are easy to pack into school lunches, take to work, or grab on the go and eat en route to one's destination. Now I'm going to have my concluding sentence, which takes the element of my topic sentence and touches upon my two details. It's easy to see why, when looking for a quick and healthy snack to eat, people would naturally think about fruit. Boom. That is the extended body paragraph structure, okay? Moving on, conclusions. Let's wrap this up. So, conclusions in general. Conclusions have to do three things, okay? A conclusion must restate the thesis. A conclusion must summarize the main points of the body paragraph. And the conclusion must end with final thoughts. And if done well, the final thoughts portion should mirror your method of introduction. And it's prompting you to go back to slide 6. So if I go back to those methods of introduction, it's actually slide 6 and 7. Let's just say I started with an anecdote. I told a personal story or a brief story to illustrate something important about my main idea. And if that's the way I started my essay, when I get to my conclusion, I'm going to go back and I'm going to reread that anecdote, and I'm going to try to mention some of those key ideas again in those final thoughts. And again, what that does is that ties the conclusion to the introduction, and it makes the essay go full circle. If you started with a famous quote, again, you might mention some of those key words from that quote. Or if you started with a question, a rhetorical question, you could bring the question up again to the reader, or you could provide that clear-cut answer. So going full circle, mirroring your method of introduction, is something I'd like to see everybody work on this year. Now, conclusions may also end by recommending a course of action, or they can provide a prediction that follows logically from your body paragraphs. That's another effective way of closing an essay, is recommending a course of action if it's appropriate, or by providing a prediction. And then finally, conclusions to avoid. One thing you definitely want to avoid is repeating the exact words of your thesis statement and listing your main points. Again, this is that kind of cliche, doesn't take a lot of thought, doesn't take a lot of effort. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste my thesis again. you don't want to use copy and paste at all anytime you're writing an essay. So you want to avoid doing that, and then just listing your main points. Again, it's too cliche. Speaking of cliche, we also want to make sure that we avoid ending with a cliche or an empty phrase. Like, this just goes to show that you can never be too careful. It would be it's a bland statement. It's not memorable, it's not powerful. It is significantly less impressive than doing something like mirroring your method of introduction, okay? And then finally, you don't want to introduce new ideas, new information, or new quotes from research in your conclusion. Reserve your conclusion paragraph for strictly wrapping up the essay. Restate the thesis, summarize those main points, make us think about something important related to your topic, and then you're good to go. All right, so avoid bringing up new things, avoid introducing new quotes, avoid introducing new information. Well, my friends, that's it for now. So next week we're going to be getting into college level thesis statements. We're going to talk about transitions and all kinds of other wonderful things. Thank you for watching.